It is the 19th of September, and our reading this day in Baptist history is Prison was his second home. Our passage of Scripture is 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and verse 1. But of the times and the seasons, brethren, you have no need that I write unto you. Francis Bapfield was born into a distinguished British family in Devonshire in 1615. His parents, John and Elizabeth, were devoutly religious, and they determined that their third son would be educated for a career in the church. During the lad's early years, he developed a deep love of literature, and while still a teenager, he left home for Oxford, where he entered Wadham College in 1631. He graduated with a B.A. on July 4th, 1635. And attained his master's degree in 1638, but in later life he looked back with disgust that he had been taught so little of the principles of the Scriptures. Bamfield was ordained deacon and presbyter by Bishops Joseph Hall and Robert Skinner of the Church of England, and was assigned a parish in Dorsetshire in July of 1639. There he received £100 annually from the parish, but he used his stipend to purchase Bibles for the poor and assist them in other ways. His personal needs were met by an annuity of £80 per year, which his father had granted him. As time progressed, he served in two other settings as a parish minister. England was in the throes of political and religious change during the years of Francis Bamfield's life. He lived and served during the period of the rule and overthrow of King Charles I, the Commonwealth, and then the return of the monarchy. From the very outset of his religious service, he was an unusual man, and following his salvation, which took place probably in the late 1650s, he revealed himself as a man of conviction. His salvation was similar to that of John Bunyan's inasmuch as he fell into deep mental depression as he realized his sinfulness. According to his own testimony, he, and I quote, lay for many years under a spirit of bondage to fear, being very often frightened in terrible dreams. End of quote. Following his conversion, Bamfield became, and I quote again, above all things a living servant of Jesus. The frowns and smiles of men were vainly used to turn him from his master. Worldly losses and bodily sufferings appeared to him as trifles compared to the supreme felicity of a conscience void of offense before God. End of quote. The Act of Uniformity in 1662 required that all clergymen subscribe to a declaration that they gave, and I quote, unfeigned assent and consent to all and everything contained and prescribed in and by the Book of Common Prayer. End of quote. All who refused to subscribe by St. Bartholomew's Day were to be deprived of their livings and were liable to 3 months' imprisonment in the event of their preaching again after that date. Of course, Bamfield could not sign the statement, and he was expelled from his church position. However, on September 19, 1662, he conducted a worship service in his house for his family and a few neighbors. His text was taken from 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, verses 6 through 7. Soldiers interrupted the service and produced a warrant for his arrest. Bamfield, his assistant Humphrey Phillips, and 25 of their followers were taken to the home of the provost marshal and detained for 5 days. The 25 were kept in one room with only one bed, and the preachers were kept in a second room. After rough treatment and being summoned to appear before 4 or 5 deputy lieutenants, the men were released. Being set free, Bamfield again returned to preaching, and a series of arrests, trials, imprisonments, and persecution ensued. He was under continual duress until finally he was imprisoned in Dorchester, where his incarceration lasted for 9 years. During that time, he preached almost every Sunday and was able to establish a church within the prison walls. It was during this imprisonment that Bamfield's study led him to embrace the observance of the Sabbath day. Upon being loosed again from jail, Bamfield established a church in Piners Hall in London on March 5, 1655. From that time onward, Bamfield was in and out of jail time and time again. He ministered in that church, whenever his prison schedule allowed until the time of his death. During the time of one of his imprisonments of that period, Bamfield came to accept believers' immersion as the only scriptural means of baptism, and he was immersed while an inmate. Of course, he led the adherents of his congregation to that biblical position, and the church at Piners Hall became the first Seventh-day Baptist church in Great Britain. On March 17, 1682, Bamfield was arrested for the last time. Following his trial, in which the jury at the order of the judge gave a verdict of guilty, he was imprisoned for what would prove the remainder of his life. The judge's sentence read, and I quote, that they were to remain in jail during their lives or during the king's pleasure, end of quote. Bamfield was incarcerated in the dread prison at Newgate. I quote now, the rigors of prison life were too much for the elderly Bamfield, who died in Newgate on February 16, 1684. He was buried on the 19th in a new graveyard purchased by the Baptists in Glasshouse Yard near Aldersgate Street, end of quote. The variety among Baptists amazes the world, and though I disagree radically with Bamfield's confusion of the relationship of the believer to the law, yet I respect the stamina and conviction that he exhibited. It is impossible to clone a genuine Baptist, for he is a composition of regeneration, independence, and resoluteness. These ingredients may be tempered by varying personalities, but at the core of the life these qualities shine forth. May God increase our number even during these days of compromise. To God be the glory.